Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to the series of our discussion on the judicial development in text files by CA Pankaj Goel. Friends, today we will discuss an important judgment which has been issued by the High Court of Bombay in the matter of Agrawal coals. The issue involves and revolves around whether the GST is payable under reverse charge mechanism by the importer if the importer procures the goods on FOB basis. Now, friends, before we discuss the judgment by the Honorable High Court of Mumbai, it is important to first understand the genesis of the issue. The genesis lies in the judgment held by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Mohit Minerals. As per the facts of the case of Mohit Mineral was procuring the goods or importing the goods both on CIF basis and FOB basis. And as you are aware that the CIF basis means cum insurance and freight, meaning thereby in case of import transactions, the foreign exporter exporting the goods to the Indian importer, he is liable to deliver the goods on the Indian shores. Means the value of the imported goods is inclusive of cost, insurance, and freight that is at the Indian port. On the contrary, in case of FOB, the free on board transaction, the property in goods transfers, or in fact, the risk transfers to the Indian importer on the foreign shore. So this is a basic difference. And in the case of Mohit Mineral, the appellant was in fact importing the goods on both CIF basis and the FOB basis. Now the issue traverses to the Supreme Court on the basis that whether the importer is liable to discharge GST under RCM or not. Now the judgment was a very detailed one. Instead of going into the final details of the judgment, what the court held, the court examined the issue from three or four perspectives. The first perspective was the reverse charge notification that was issued by the authorities. As you are aware that the notification of the reverse charge has been issued under Section 5.3, Section 5 subsection 3 of the IGST Act, wherein the GST in the reverse charge has to be paid by the recipient of services on the transactions which are notified by the Government of India by way of a notification. The Supreme Court interpreted this Section 5 subsection 3 of the IGST Act as that the government didn't have or doesn't have the power to prescribe who the person would be for payment of GST. The court held that the GST has to be paid by the recipient in that transaction. Now the question arises, what do we mean by the recipient of services or supply? Now this concept has been elaborately defined under Section 2 Clause 93 of the CGST Act, wherein they say that if the consideration is payable, then the recipient is the person who is liable to pay tax. And then there is another, the fine print is that that the reference to a recipient will include a person who actually received the services. So the court here noted that since the importer has received the services, the importer will be treated as the recipient of services. This was the first aspect. The second aspect which the court also took notice of is that the liability or the liability to pay GST and the reverse charge, which has been casted upon the importer, also come from Section 5 subsection 4 of the IGST Act. Now, what does Section 5 subsection 4 tells us about? Section 5 subsection 4 deals with a case wherein a person, if a supplier supplies certain notified services to certain unregistered person, then the notified person would be treated as a recipient and would be liable to pay the GST. The court held that irrespective of the fact that the earlier notification was issued under subsection 5 subsection 3, the power to treat the importer as a recipient of services can be taken from section 5 subsection 4. This is the previous judgment of the Supreme Court, wherein they mentioned that the incorrect mentioning of a statutory provision from where the notification is borrowing the power will not take away or will not make that notification ultra vires. The third aspect, on both these grounds, the Supreme Court held in favor of the revenue that yes, the importer would be treated as the recipient of service, and hence the tax would be payable under RCM, should be payable under RCM. Now, the third contention, the third issue on which was a very significant issue and was canvassed by the respondent, in this case the Mohit Mineral, they canvassed that the transaction which has been undertaken is nothing but a composite supply. Friends, as you are aware that the composite supply concept was there in is there in the CGF state right from the start. The court noted that the activity here in the present fact pattern is, number one, the supply of goods, and number two is wherein the foreign exporter talks or hires the foreign shipping line for transportation of goods from foreign shore to the Indian shore. But in a nutshell, what the importer gets the imported goods in India on which the custom duty is payable. The court held clearly that it cannot be said that on the one hand, the recipient is the service recipient, the importer is the service recipient, but simultaneously that if the goods are subjected to custom duty and the value of that value of the imported goods includes invariably the transportation cost also. So this would amount to tantamount to double taxation. And as per the judgment held by the coordinate bench of the Supreme Court in the matter of BSNL, the aspect theory is not applicable, is not viable if the attempt is made to include the transaction value of the value of service into the value of goods or the vice versa. So the court held that since the transaction is the transaction of import of goods, there will be no GST payable under RCM. Now, friends, of course, if we see this case, the court was dealing in fact, the judgment of the Supreme Court that elaborately dealt with the CIF import of the goods by a importer in India. Now, coming to the present facts of the case, in the case of Agarwal Coals, the importer was importing the goods on the FOB basis, right? The authorities audited the client, the assessee, and held and noted that the assessee is not paying GST under RCM on the importation of the goods, the transportation, wherein the goods are being taken from outside India to the Indian shore. The assessee argued before the court that since the matter is settled by the Honorable Supreme Court in the matter of Mohit Mineral, there should be no GST liability on that thing. The High Court of Bombay upheld the contention of the assessee of the importer on two grounds. The first one is that the High Court of Gujarat, which was held in the favor of Mohit Mineral and which was then finalized by the apex court, there in a certain para it was clearly mentioned that Mohit Mineral was importing the goods on both FOB and CIF basis. Number one. Number two, the High Court of Bombay held that since the notification under which the government intended to tax the transaction was quashed or was held ultra vires by the Supreme Court, so that leaves no power to the government to levy the tax. So, friends, it's interesting to see how the case would go on further. Whether the petitioner would the revenue would appeal before the Supreme Court that the judgment held by the Supreme Court in the matter of Mohit Mineral was only pertaining to CIF value, or will accept that.